rural way of life in the Blackfoot Watershed for present and future generations. That's the only piece I can remember.
You did really well.
I got.
Yeah, it was good.
But so you can imagine what was the piece maybe we'd forgotten, that we'd been moving dirt, we've been looking at maps like this, all kinds of conservation resource wise. What did we forget? We forgot our communities. And so in this valley, and Greg will talk a lot more in detail about how the valley's laid out, but 7 different communities. But we really lost touch with the people that lived in those communities and really asking them what they wanted. And I think that's the real success what the Blackfoot Challenge does, is it creates this forum to bring together many different resource values. But when we came to this project, it really helped us set that up, and we really couldn't have done it without that sort of baseline stuff that our previous generation folks had started. So I give them a ton of credit for that. So I sort of think it's kind of 4 pillars for me that make a difference, that if you were trying to explain the Blackfoot Challenge to someone. And that first one is about people. And that's our natural resource. That's our best resource here. And so when we started looking at the Blackfoot Community Project or the BCCA, it was really sort of slowing that pace down. Now all of us probably in our own minds, and Denny, he'd jump in here anywhere, but we all probably had thoughts of, man, this is easy, we know what we want that, we look at this map and go, this can go there, all that stuff. We had to slow that down and take that pace to the communities and ask those folks what they wanted. And that's usually sort of our Achilles heels, because you have this partnership, you have lots of people with that resource background that know or think they know what the valley should look like. But it really took that time to back up and find out what all those really local, really heartfelt values were to that land. And so that, again, allowed people to interact with that. Again, we talk a lot about focal species in this valley, and you probably do as well, and it really came down to focal people. So not only in naming or thinking about that map, we had to find people like Hank. He was that focal person that could understand all the different values, the different people that, I mean, Hank, 300, 400 meetings, I don't even know what you did. So whatever I think we learned out of it is just bringing it back home, bringing it to that community level and letting it come from here, and not any preconceived plans or thoughts or how people thought it should be. And I think that was really important. The second part is about process. And so often that's part of that people thing, it's a process, and if you know the science and biology, all that stuff, it should be easy, right? But it's that social fabric that takes the local people, the Denny Iversons of the world, to bring his community up to speed and find out what they want. And so being respectful, being proper paced, having all those meetings. We had numerous people throughout the valley that had differing values and time set, what they could spend time on. And so how do you really be respectful to them and make sure that they never feel out of that process? So that's continually going back multiple meetings there. So again, I think staying to something that everyone agreed to, that process is really critical. And then as Greg says, at some point you have to quit talking about it, you actually have to get something done. And that has a whole varying, won't even try to get into, you'll hear a lot of it, but some things that were just real, not only the community values, but you start thinking about how are we actually going to complete this. So it has values as in the county commissioners, it has values as in if you have a mayor or something in your town, making sure that communication link stays going. So we had to figure out how we were going to raise a lot of money. So that included making sure that we included all our folks through the Washington, D.C. network as well. So once we sort of did that and we had the right people in the right places, we could get a lot of that work done. And in the end, it's why you guys are here today. The last piece is that transferability, that what we tried to think about, we hope that we'd find folks like yourselves that would bring lessons learned from Washington to help us, as well as we could go other places. And I think the future of this type of conservation and being able to talk to foundations or people that will fund this kind of thing, it's extremely important that we share those things. And it isn't just about Montana, it's about our friends in Florida that are trying to do the same thing, our friends in Maine, or as you all are here today. And I think that story is so valuable to our future and to what conservation means in the West. And so I'm not gonna dwell on, but I'm really, really glad you all are here. We like to have a lot of fun. So I hope we'll make this couple days for you guys a lot of fun, and please ask a lot of questions, whatever you need. So thanks for being here. Great.
All right, thanks, Jim. So we had, there's 4 of us that are going to tag team this, or there was going to be 4 of us. B. Hall with the Nature Conservancy, his wife was sick, so he had to bag today. But old B, he was one of the founders of the Blackfoot, and TNC has been here a long time, and so unfortunately B couldn't be here today. But so the 3 of us are going to tag team this a little bit. Jim started with sort of the Blackfoot Challenge and the community and the people side of things. I'm going to sort of transition from that through one of our committees into the Blackfoot Community Project, Plum Creek, and then Hank is going to take the last leg of it and go from, so how do we engage the community and get all the way down to our community conservation area and talk about specifics there. And so, and then we're going to leave plenty of time for questions and answers and really kick things around. And like Jim said, hopefully we'll learn from you guys as much as maybe you'll learn from us. So Jim said the Blackfoot Challenge started in 1993, but conservation really started in the 70s. That's we always look at it. Conservation easement legislation in Montana started in the 70s. The first easements in Montana were in the Blackfoot. That was sort of what we consider home. But we weren't coordinated, as Jim said. We didn't come together as a community, so we needed a structure of the Blackfoot Challenge. So 1993, we got this 501c3 started. We got agencies, we got landowners, we got all these different partners that sit on this and coordinate sort of the resource management of the Blackfoot Watershed. And then we have 7 different committees. I think there's still 7 committees.
We might be 8 with rural sustainability now.
Okay, 7 or 8 committees, from water to forestry to wildlife to conservation strategies, which is what we're going to talk about, where the Blackfoot Community Project and the Blackfoot Community Conservation Area sit into it. So we're going to spend the next 2 days really honing in on this one piece of it, but sort of keep in mind that there's this bigger effort to think about the whole watershed. Yeah, go ahead. So, maps.
Yeah.
Wow, you know, coming back today was a lot of fun because a lot of us spent a lot of time with those kind of things right there. And when we started our Blackfoot Community Project and our Blackfoot Community Conservation Area, we didn't have a watershed map. We didn't have GIS. We didn't have those things. We were taking Forest Service maps and BLM maps, and we were pasting them up on the wall, trying to stick them together to try to figure out what our watershed was. And so I want to give you, this is an old outdated map here, but I want to give you a snapshot of our landscape so that as you go through the week, you've got a feel for it, right? Okay. So our watershed is 1.5 million acres in size. The Blackfoot River itself flows 132 miles down to the town of Missoula down here. Okay. We have the Bob Marshall Wilderness Glacier National Park, Canada up to the north of us, right? The green is Forest Service land, with the dark green being wilderness. The yellow is Bureau of Land Management land. There's some purple in here, that's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service land. So those are our federal ownerships. And then our state ownership, the light blue is Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks land. The dark blue is DNRC, or Department of Natural Resource Conservation, school state trust lands. The gray is Lubrecht and Bandy experimental places, so university lands that are managed accordingly. That ownership is about 60% of our watershed when we started our conservation work. So about 900,000 acres was in federal and state ownership, okay? So that meant 40% was in private ownership. And of our 40%, half of it was Plum Creek Timber Company. So all this pink and all this salmon, when we started, that was Plum Creek Timber Company. They were our largest landowner in the Blackfoot, 300,000 acres, our largest landowner in Montana, and of course, our largest landowner across the country.
Can you show us where we are on that map?
Yes. So, Sealy Lake is up here. We're right in here.
Okay.
Yeah, right up in here.
Thank
Yep. So Ovando's right there, you're gonna be there. The community conservation area is right in here, which you're gonna go look at later today. Thank you. So the other part of it is this white land and all these hash marks. These hash marks are conservation easements in the middle, but the white is private land. So 300,000 acres of private lands, okay? Average ranch size is about 200,000 acres. We have 7 communities, 8,900.
200,000 acres.
What's that?
You said 200,000.
Oh, isn't that what size your ranch is?
That's all.
That's far.
Thanks for the gift, Gary.
That's what he told me.
Bingo.
He bought it. I don't know.
Sorry, 2,000
Texas
acres.
lately or something?
Yeah. So we got private lands, about 300,000, mostly the valley bottom. We got public lands, mostly the higher elevation stuff. And then we had all this Plum Creek Timber Company land in the middle of it. So the Blackfoot Challenge started in '93, right? In 1998, we brought all the conservation groups together in the Blackfoot. And we had a meeting and we said, don't you think we ought, even though the challenge was formed, we weren't coordinating on things like land acquisition and conservation easements. And we said, don't you think we ought to all be coordinating and working on this? And in 1998, we couldn't get people to do that. And so we took a step back and we said, okay, what's missing here? And one of the things that was missing was we didn't have private landowners, we didn't have community leaders in that group. So we got back together again in Lubrecht in 2000, and we had we had 25 people in the room. Half of them were landowners, half of them were agency and conservation group folks, and we said, here's our watershed. We got all this stuff going on, but it's great, but we're not coordinated at a landscape scale. Do we want to be that? And if so, what do we need to do? And we asked everyone to go up on the map, old school, and take a marker and put some circles on the map and say, what is the most important areas for you to be thinking about? And lo and behold, we had thought, this private lands and conservation easement, and we had all this work going on in public lands. It was sort of that aha moment for us where we went, oh shit, what about Plum Creek? What happens if Plum Creek divests of that land? What happens for our viewshed? What happens for hunting? What happens for timber products? What happens to our economy? All these, what happens to biological corridors and all those things? And we went, wow, we need to think about this. Plum Creek Timber Company was on board of the Blackfoot Challenge. And so we began this discussion in our group of 25 people, this Conservation Strategies Committee, and we said, we need to get ahead of this. And we heard some rumblings that Plum Creek was thinking about, moving from a timber company to a, what do we call it?
Real estate.
Real estate development. And so they were looking at potentially divesting. And we were really concerned about this salmon-colored land that was the farthest from their mill, more checkerboard, isolated. And so the Nature Conservancy, Blackfoot Challenge, and all the partners were sitting there, and we said, let's go to Plum Creek and ask them if they would consider selling a conservation easement on 100,000 acres of their land. And the Nature Conservancy had a relationship with Plum Creek, so did the Challenge. We thought, well, the Nature Conservancy can really be the banker, because we can't afford that kind of money up front to start with. And the Nature Conservancy said, well, we're not going to do it unless you can guarantee us that we have community support and all those things. And so it was a natural, nice fit. TNC went to Plum Creek and said, we'd like to consider buying a conservation easement from you on 100,000 acres. And this is where things got interesting for us, because Plum Creek said no. But they said, but we'd be willing to sell it to you. I went, oh my God, okay. So now what do we do? So we came back through a process, worked through it, and Jim Stone says, you know what, guys? If we're gonna do this, we're gonna have a public meeting. And this is, we just talked about it earlier this morning, as a federal employee, we have this long history of that's not what you do. You go back to your little hole and you decide this is what we want to do with it, and then you write an EA, and then you go to the community, right? That's the way we do business. And the Blackfoot Challenge went, you go to the community and you ask the community, and if the community wants that, then collectively you begin to work through this process, and then you develop your EAs on how it's going to go. Well, that is an interesting process for us, and this is our landscape today, and we'll talk more about that in length. But this is where we landed. And we landed with, it ended up being 89,000 acres. Some of that checkerboard stuff fell off. We ended up buying 89,000 acres from Plum Creek Timber Company. And we spent a lot of time thinking about this. We had a public meeting, had 100 and some people there, standing room only in the Ovando gym. And the folks said, yes, we want you to buy it. And we said, we're not gonna buy it unless you agree to step up and help us decide who should own it and how it should be managed. And then we're all gonna fundraise together and we're gonna figure this out together. That's the only way we're gonna do this. And you know, this is kind of weird, but I'm gonna say it. The name of something is really important. This isn't the Blackfoot Ecosystem Project. This isn't the Blackfoot, forest cutting project or whatever it is. The Blackfoot Community Conservation Area. We spent days trying to figure out names, and why did we do that? Because we didn't want to leave anyone off the sides, so that people could then lob a rock and say, all you guys care about is recreation, or all you guys care about is environmentalism. No, we care about all those things. As Jim said, if we don't get the economics, we don't get the social, and we don't get the biological, then we didn't get it. And so we spent a lot of time really thinking about that name and how it should look. And so when we did this, it was 2002, so almost 20 years ago, which is hard to believe.
More brain cells I had those days.
So we did it in 2 phases. So the red and blue are the lands that we bought as part of the Blackfoot Community Project to the tune of about $75 million. We did it in 2 phases. And you kind of see how these are clumped together. Okay, so we, the Nature Conservancy, bought it. The Blackfoot Challenge then came in and said, okay, we're going to invest in the community and figure out what the community wants. So what do? What's the first thing you got to do? Jim already said it. People. Am I the guy to be up front, a federal agency person? Am I the person that should be up front selling this? Probably not. Was B. Hall with the Nature Conservancy, was he probably the right guy to be up front selling it? As much as he was a great guy, probably not. Who is somebody that was respected in the community that's got a gift to gab, right? But a gift to bring agency people together, gift to bring fundraisers together, gift to bring people together, county commissioners, all that stuff had to be brought together. And we knew that if we were gonna be successful, we had to have the right person doing that. And so one of the first things we did is we came together and said, we gotta get somebody who can sell this product. And so that person was Hank Goetz for us. And so we had this committee, we had a disposition committee, our disposition working group to decide, okay, who's gonna eventually own this land? And then we had a management. What are the issues out there? Is it important for recreation? Is it important for grazing? Is it important for timber? We had to work through all those different things in each one of these segments of land to try to decide what's important, community, what's important economically, what's important biologically, and then who do we think ought to own it, and then how are we gonna get the money to do it, and then how are we gonna pull all that off, and how do we keep going back to the community and say, okay, this is what you guys said you wanted to buy it, so we're gonna buy it, and now you said you want to be managed for this, so, and now we think that this entity should be the owner of it. Are we right on that? Do we got it? And then how do we work through this? And Jim said this process. So important having a process laid out up front that these are how the decisions are going to be made. Boom, 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 boom. And the board doesn't come in and overrule that process that the community came up with, right? It's got to be organic, otherwise you're going to lose the people. And so I'm going to shut up and sit down and let Hank go into, so, one second, so I'm gonna let Hank go into, so, okay, you got the 89,000 acres, you had the public meeting, we got this input from folks. Now how do we go from there to selling it, divesting it, and how do we get to a community forest or community conservation area, and how does that structure work?
I just had a question on the Blackfoot Challenge.
Yeah.
When did that become something?
1993,
And that something was?
a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
How long before that was it a quasi something?
So 1976.
is.
So we said the mid-70s, right? So we started, but we started our formal public meetings in 1991.
Okay,
So 1991 is we went around to all the communities and we said, are you concerned about what may be coming? Should we do something about it? And that's where we got the input. And then it took us 2 years to get to the process of forming, having an executive director and working through that.
thank you.
Anchor.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a couple slides here, so.
Oh, okay. I guess just to build a little bit on what Jim and Greg talked about. First of all, I kind of 3 P's, I guess, and I'm just following right along. And the one that, place-wise, to start with, gives I noticed much different little situation than you're faced with there in Washington, where this is a rural area. I mean, you've got more people maybe in Cleellum than we do in the valley. I don't know how many did you?
8,900.
Yeah, okay. And Ellensburg. So
We have, our county's 46,000.
yeah. So plus we're not 2 Crown Royals away from any population center like Seattle. So and Ovando being right in the middle. The place you can see, and Chattanooga very similar to there, the high country, federal, the intermediate ground, a mix of private and at one time the Plum Creek, and then private in the bottom. But the most important, you have to keep coming back, and I know you know this and you've heard it from all of us and you'll continue, are the people involved. And we were really fortunate here in the valley. We go back with TNC in that some of the early project in 1970 when the Nature Conservancy had 1 person west of the Mississippi, right? In San Francisco, Huey Johnson, and they followed up, they really expanded and got somebody in Portland for crying out loud, right? And now look at it, right? So,
We're everywhere.
yeah, you're everywhere, and if there is anything I'd say, if you have to have a partner, TNC is the person, is the outfit to be a partner with. It's just, there's no question. I'm really disappointed that B Hall couldn't be here, because if there was a godfather of the Blackfoot Community Project, and then as the BCCA fell out of that, it was B Hall. He was open. I remember they held their meetings at Lubrecht in our conference room, and I was the manager, director, whatever, over there. And I'd leave my door open, right? And I heard him talking about this. And B said at one point, what we ought to do is just buy that ground. And I thought, holy crap, what are they smoking? That was a university property, and that was before marijuana was really, legal, etc. But they stuck with it, right? And when it came to the fundraising, it was the same way. And so, the other thing I'd like to stress, you're gonna hear all the nuts and bolts of this whole thing, but were the groups of people involved in the process. And Greg mentioned there were the federal agencies. You can see here and around our BCCA